Good evening. Against the backdrop of international troops, including US forces withdrawing from Afghanistan, Afghan President Hamid Karzai is slated to visit India on an official 4-day tour starting November 9. Mr. Karzai is expected to update New Delhi on the ongoing flux in his country and the process of reconciliation with the Taliban, among other things on the agenda. Karzai's visit comes at a time when a resurgent Taliban has escalated violence across the country. The India-educated Afghan leader is also expected to ink at least 4 MOUs with India on mining, fertilizers, youth affairs and small development projects. Karzai will begin his trip from Mumbai, where he will meet industry leaders and push for investment in Afghanistan in spite of the many security challenges facing that country. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Karzai will hold intensive talks on bilateral and regional security situation on November the 12th. It is also expected that the New Delhi will stress on security to Indian interests and projects in Afghanistan. The two sides will also explore ways to step up Indian training for Afghan national security forces during the visit. Ahead of Karzai's visit, the government is seeking cabinet approval to start work on a series of development projects to be built at a cost of $100 million as part of India's bid to help the reconstruction of the war-ravaged country. With the 2014 deadline for the exit of the US-led international troops fast approaching, the Indian government has been slowly increasing its profile in Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight on The Big Picture, we discuss the upcoming visit, but that's not all. We'll also discuss the state of Afghanistan, the immediate challenges it faces, and of course the future role that India is expected to play in Afghanistan. The Big Picture is a half-an-hour show, ladies and gentlemen, but I would like to dedicate some time towards the end of the program to the security threat posed by the resurgent Taliban in the country. And to discuss this, I'm joined by Vinod Sharma, political editor of Hindustan Times, also Professor Savita Pandey, who teaches in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Completing the panel today will be retired Commodore Uday, Bhaskar, who is a fellow for a think tank in Delhi, a Society for Policy Studies, I beg your pardon. Welcome to the show, Commodore Bhaskar. I'd like to start with Vinod Sharma, if I could. Sir, Karzai's visit comes at a very crucial time. The US-led international troops leave by 2014, and the Afghan government in a recent claim has said that 75% of the handover from US and NATO forces is complete, and they control 75% of the country. Now, how important is this particular visit to India at this juncture? India has been for a while wanting to increase their presence, not to mention influence in Afghanistan.
Well, of course, this visit must have been planned earlier, but it comes also in the wake of the US elections. And if one had watched debates between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, the Republican candidate was not as sure about 2014 withdrawal. In fact, they had a different viewpoint. But Barack Obama was very clear that the American forces, together with its allies, would like to withdraw from Afghanistan by 2014. And in the meanwhile prepare the Afghan government and its security agencies and other arms to run their own country and master their own destiny. No, but the fact remains that countries like India can contribute their bit, and they have contributed their bit despite serious threats to all Indian establishments in Afghanistan. This threat is not directly coming from the Taliban, it is abetted by other forces, most likely Pakistan. And I think that this is good time to discuss with President Karzai as to short of military cooperation, what all India can do. We have a strategic partnership with which we signed last year with Afghanistan, and that partnership was also in the context of withdrawal of troops by the United States and other countries by 2014. So this is one trip one has to look forward to, because India has already committed more than $2 billion US, if I get the figures right,
500 crore rupees
by way of assistance to Afghanistan. And despite that, there is a threat to our engineers, to our experts, our technocrats, and also our diplomats.
Right.
And I think that at some stage, President Karzai will have to talk this out with the Pakistanis, whom he calls as his brother.
Right.
While we are their friends.
I want to come to Professor Savita Pandey on this. India has already pledged, like Vinod Sharma said, around 500 crores to build small but important infrastructure projects in all 34 provinces of Afghanistan. And is also constructing the Afghanistan Parliament building. Now, closer ties with India is something that Afghanistan has always wanted. In fact, Mr. Karzai always wary of Islamabad's influence and dominance in that, especially in that Pashtun area. But the signs are ominous. this, what is your take on what people are calling, some people are calling a potential civil war-like situation in Afghanistan post the withdrawal? How difficult is it going to be for Karzai to actually maintain control over Afghanistan?
Well, the cliche as it goes is that President Karzai's writ doesn't run beyond Kabul, but it doesn't run within Kabul also. So it will be difficult. If you look into the political history of Afghanistan, none of the groups have ever been able to take a control. It has been internecine strife between the warlords and with external factors complicating the issue. And therefore, a post-withdrawal scenario is going to be extremely challenging for President Karzai and for us also, because the external factors are going to be extremely active there. And I wish to mention the name of China here. They have already won a mining contract there, they have won drilling contracts there. And once the Americans withdraw, you will see the Chinese presence there, the Sino-Pak combined presence there and combined operation there, which will be a challenge for President Karzai and which will be a challenge for us.
Absolutely. I want to get in retired Commodore Bhaskar into it. You heard what Professor Pandey had to say right now. India, more than ever, will have to increase its presence in Afghanistan, in that country, because like Professor Pandey said, China is already in and they already have contracts. How important is it for India to maintain now closer ties and work towards closer relationship with Kabul?
It's very important. I think just as both the members on the panel had said, Vinod Sharma and Savita Pandey, that India has an abiding relationship with Afghanistan, the Karzai regime, and we have invested more than 2 billion US dollars, which is almost 10,000 crores, towards a number of projects which would have a long-term effect in the reconstruction of Afghanistan. Now, the security challenges are no less daunting, and it is very tragic that even as we discuss the forthcoming visit of President Karzai to Delhi, today there were 3 attacks in 3 different places and as many as 18 people died. Innocents, civilians, some soldiers, and this is going to be the ongoing, I would say, security challenge for President Karzai. So to that extent, I think India, as a country that has entered into a partnership agreement with Afghanistan, should do what it can. But the only, I would say, caveat is that at this point in time, India has to be very cautious about what kind of a security role, profile, responsibility it would be willing to undertake. And the reason I say this is because you will recall there was a time when Pakistan, the United States, and many of Afghanistan's interlocutors were hesitant about India getting involved in a direct security role. But again, I do believe that one place where India can make a very important contribution is as far as the training of Afghan security forces, Afghan police forces are concerned. And I believe that this is one of the issues, one of the items that will be on the agenda when President Karzai is in Delhi.
Right, fair point, sir. Fair point. Let me just quickly go across to Professor Pandey, then I'll come to you, Mr. Sharma. President Obama has already withdrawn about 33,000 surge troops sent to Afghanistan in 2010, with 68,000 still remaining in different parts of the country. But there seems to be no consensus on the blueprint on the troop withdrawal, even within the Obama administration. The coalition commanders have yet to determine at what pace these troops will be pulled out over the next 2 years. Do you think that could pose a bit of a problem? No clarity on that?
There is no clarity because of the historical record. You see, after the Soviets withdrew, the Americans completely withdrew from the region, which posed the most serious challenge to them. Again, when they did the carpet bombing and Operation Freedom, whatever they launched, they immediately went to Iraq, leaving the field free, which saw the resurgence of Taliban. These are the 2 issues which have generated debate in Pakistan, which have generated apprehension in Pakistan, which has generated an extremely anti-US feeling in Pakistan, to the extent that President Obama perhaps was most unpopular in the country called Pakistan in the pre-election survey. The debate within the US administration falls back from this. how far we should withdraw and how far we should go on spending in a war which seems endless.
Right.
That is why there is a debate within the Obama administration and within, the other circles also, what will be the US role post-Afghanistan, although they have repeatedly said that this time there is going to be no clean swipe like it happened in 89.
Very pertinent point, Professor Pandey. I think I want to come to you, Mr. Sharma, on this. One thing is for certain, Obama really wants to get out of Afghanistan. He's promised his people that. He's based his campaign on that. But looking at it from a historical perspective, like Professor Pandey just mentioned, do you think Obama can avoid the mistakes the administrations of Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr. did? Once their purpose was served in the area, in the region, they just upped and left the place. And that's how we got today's Islamic radicals all over the place. Do you think that the absence of a more or less concrete policy on the region, do you think a complete troop withdrawal from Afghanistan would be yet another mistake by Obama?
Look, you see, in the West and in the United States, as you yourself pointed out, this has become a domestic issue. But it is not exactly just a domestic issue. It has got a direct bearing on America's reliability as a helper and how long can it sustain, and its attention span when it comes to hotspots in the world. It still fancies itself as a world policeman. It fancies itself as a great power which carries with it all the democratic credentials and try and inculcate democracy across the world. I think that before Barack Obama, regardless of what promises has he made to his people, must carry out consultations with all stakeholders. And when President Karzai arrives in Delhi, our leadership must engage with him vigorously in order to get his assessment as to how prepared are the Afghan security forces and other institutions in holding on after the Americans leave. Do they have the required strength and the expertise and the reach within the country to face the Taliban? Is the Karzai administration a cohesive entity, or is it badly infiltrated by Talibani interests? What is going to be the role of Pakistan? Mind you, Pakistan has always insisted that its security concerns have to be given precedence over the security concerns of any other country in the region, because Afghanistan has long borders with Pakistan.
Right.
I know the same position as we have on Sri Lanka and Nepal. So I think that there has to be a serious discussion. There cannot be any unilateralism insofar as America is concerned before they, turn their back on Afghanistan.
Right.
Because this is a problem which has been created largely by America itself.
Right.
So it cannot leave it for others to sort it out.
Right. I want to get in Commodore Bhaskar. In the constant threat from the Taliban, Commodore Bhaskar is also a cause for worry. Numerous reports, intelligence reports, ground reports, as well as some reports in the media point towards an immediate threat of the Taliban re-emerging as a potent force across Afghanistan. It seems that radicals affiliated with the Taliban as well as other anti-Karzai forces are lying quietly in wait. They will wait for international troops to withdraw and then launch offensive all over the country that could plunge the country into chaos, or a deeper version of the chaos it already is in. Your assessment on the resurgence of Taliban? They've recently circulated a note telling Obama not to tell lies to his people and get out of the country.
I'd like to extend this formulation of the Taliban to say that we are actually looking at a certain ideology, a very extremist kind of radical ideology, which ostensibly derives some of its traction from its interpretation of Islam. And this is something that has now permeated the entire region. If we spoke about 18 people being killed in Afghanistan today by these very adherents from this constituency who believe in such violence in terms of the objective that they are trying to realize, it is equally tragic that today in Karachi, we had another similar instance where groups affiliated to this particular ideology, whether they owe allegiance to the Pakistan Taliban or some other groups is a matter of detail, but they had attacked the Rangers camp in Karachi for much the same reason. So what we are looking at, as I see it, is a challenge that has, in a way, I think, crossed the so-called political boundaries, and both Afghanistan and Pakistan are caught in what you might again describe as the equivalent of the Malala syndrome, that there are now adherents to this particular ideology of extreme violence, wherein they believe that taking recourse to this kind of a path will allow them to get their objectives. Now, is there a subtext of politics? Perhaps the answer is yes, in terms of how these groups are orienting themselves for the post 2014 scenario. And there I agree with what Vinod is saying, that this is a challenge that affects the security interests of all the principal interlocutors in the region, meaning it is India, it is Iran, it is Russia, and even China in different ways have anxieties about what this ideology will do.
Right.
And for the United States, I mean, we are talking about President Barack Obama's re-election. It merits recall that in March 2009, soon after he was sworn in for his first term, he made a very important AFPAC speech about rearranging, reprioritizing American objectives as far as AFPAC is concerned. So as I see it, this is going to be a very complex challenge. Current reading is that the Afghan state does not have the capacity.
Right.
And we in India have had many casualties in Afghanistan because of Afghanistan.
Commodore Bhaskar, you make a very important point. I want to talk about that after the break. You said that the Afghan forces are not really equipped or words to that effect. I want to discuss that after the break. Short breather time here on The Big Picture. We'll come back lots more after the break. Welcome back to The Big Picture. Professor Savita Pandey is still with us. Commodore Bhaskar made a very important point about the state, the Afghan security forces not being completely equipped. This is a statement. I'm going to read two lines from a Taliban statement that they immediately sent out after Obama's victory speech. And I quote now, Obama must understand very well now that they have lost the war in Afghanistan. Instead of telling lies to his nation and his people, he must leave our country as soon as possible and instead look after his country and his people's lives. Do you think the Afghan security forces, ma'am, are trained enough and more importantly, equipped enough at this juncture to tackle a possible Taliban offensive right now?
Let me tell you what I read about the Afghan forces. The situation today is because there's a massive recruitment. 2010, the number was 1,50,000, you know. And obviously, it is impossible for any country in the situation that Afghanistan is to get a fully trained, disciplined force. And what the papers say that some of the troops, you know, they cannot even read their salary checks, you know. If that is the kind of situation, you can imagine what kind of forces are there which are trained. The numbers have to be full. One thing where I'm saying the Americans will revise. I mean, don't think that if they are withdrawing, yes, they may stick to their 2014 guidelines, but they will revise their strategy. They revised it. Commodore Bhaskar talked about AFPAC. They realized what a big mistake the word AFPAC itself was, you know. The Afghans didn't like it, the Pakistanis didn't like it, and we didn't like it. Afghanistan is Afghanistan, and Pakistan is Pakistan. And after 2010, they stopped using the word AFPAC officially. Similarly, now that a major development which took place in September was the highest level of Chinese official visiting Afghanistan.
Right.
You know, this has raised everybody's eyes because after 66, this is a first visit by an official of this level, you know. And my surmise is that you know, everything is so fluctuating. So definitely to say that the Americans would leave everything to Afghans so categorically, I think I would be a little skeptical about that.
Mr. Sharma, China keeps coming up. I mean, India should not just be worried about Taliban or other radical forces. China is a big worry as well in
Of course, the quantum of mineral wealth on which Afghanistan is sitting, and a large number of Chinese companies are already engaging in the exploration of that wealth. I think that I agree with Professor Pandey that the Americans will have to rethink their strategy and they'll have to keep a permanent presence in Afghanistan because, you know, it is generally presumed that most of the adventures in mineral-rich and oil-rich countries have been to partake of that wealth, you know, for their own use in their country. So I think that though Obama would like to gain some degree of popularity with the American people by withdrawing the forces, but there will have to be a nucleus kept there permanently. And this will have to be a team of crack commandos, crack marines, who could, whenever the need arises, be of help to Afghanistan.
Precision strikes.
Yes. And secondly, you see, what is happening within Pakistan could have a direct bearing on the developments in Afghanistan. There are certain forces on the rise in that country. One does not know what kind of legislative strength will they acquire in the new assembly, and their elections are due next year. Elections have happened in the United States. Elections are due in Pakistan
And Afghanistan.
and Afghanistan. And I think these are times which are very difficult times for these countries to have elections in the face of such challenges. And so I think that there'll have to be some rethink done. And if need be, President Obama can explain it to the people of United States, because if there is a renewed challenge to the security of America, from a place where the epicenter is Afghanistan, I think that the whole edifice of his model falls flat.
Right.
So I think that the Republicans would start breathing down his neck.
Right.
Because they have a different view of the situation in Afghanistan, and they are for a sustained presence there, as opposed to the populist thinking that the Americans should withdraw.
Yeah.
I think that the last word is still to be heard. It will all depend on what transpires between now and 2014.
Right. Afghan elections, Commodore Bhaskar, we're talking about Afghan elections as well, due in 2014. It takes us to a most important question. Some suggest that Karzai's own legitimacy as a president, now charges of fraudulent electoral processes and managed elections have haunted him ever since he became president. Karzai and other politicians in Afghanistan have been attacking the International Crisis Group. Also the Carnegie Endowment, which came up with a report saying that the Taliban will take over as soon as the Americans leave. Shouldn't the focus right now, Commodore Bhaskar, from Karzai's side and other Afghan politicians' side, should be making the electoral process a little more transparent and accountable and start building trust among ordinary Afghans? And is the lack of that not a major roadblock in the path towards peace in Afghanistan?
Well, I would say that at the moment, if you were to put yourself in President Karzai's shoes, as President of Afghanistan, he is trying to discharge certain responsibilities. And we started this discussion saying that the writ of the Karzai regime, does it extend anywhere beyond Kabul, or does it even have any credibility within Kabul? On both counts, I think the answers have not been very encouraging. But he's also aware that there is 2014, there is the American so-called deadline, and I fully agree with this point. I do not believe that the Americans will leave Afghanistan lock, stock and barrel. They will be the equivalent of a residual military presence of the United States that would have various functions. It would be surveillance, it would be various other aspects of providing support. They may not have boots on the ground as they do at this point in time. But there is also a political dynamic, which is that as and when the elections are announced and various parties are jostling already, my reading is that at the moment, Afghanistan and President Karzai himself are trying very hard to begin this process of reconciliation and see which elements of the Taliban are willing to abide by those red lines that India has often spoken about, that A, you renounce violence, and 2, you accept the constitution of Afghanistan.
But Commodore Bhaskar, does the concept of the good Taliban and the bad Taliban still hold any water? Haven't we seen that there is no such thing as a good and a bad Taliban?
No, that's why I'm a little hesitant to use that kind of a classification about good and bad, because the logic being that anyone who is renouncing violence and who accepts the constitution of Afghanistan would then be seen as one of the factions within this very diverse Afghan polity. So therefore, there is one attempt by President Karzai, but we must also accept that any politician who is entering an election, the primary objective will be to consolidate power if you already have it and you are in the equivalent of the ruling party. And if you are in the opposition, clearly the objective is to see how you can get into the seat of power.
Right.
So today the reading is that those factions, those groups, and let's face it, there are many charges of transgression and corruption that have been leveled against President
Karzai
Karzai
himself.
and key members of his regime.
Right.
So he's also having to address that internally. But the reading is on the wall. I mean, to me, it's very clear, or
Right.
the reading is clear on the wall,
Right.
that Afghanistan is positioning itself for the forthcoming election.
Absolutely.
And each side would try to gain maximum advantage in the process.
Right. I want to very briefly come to Vinod Sharma. Sir, we don't have much time, but one brief comment from you. Key takeaway for India, and what should really New Delhi? You mentioned what New Delhi has to do when Karzai comes, but 2-3 quick points that need to be on the agenda and have to be made clear to Kabul, whoever is in government in Kabul, from India's side.
India has to come to an assessment as to how confident is Karzai about post 2014. India should also get to know, have a fair idea as to what could be the results of the next elections in Afghanistan, and whether or not there has been some softening up, some change of thinking in Pakistan on this reality of India and Pakistan working at cross purposes in Afghanistan. That is there a realization that the best bet for both countries in the region is that they work together rather than at cross purposes.
Right.
I don't see much of a change of thinking on this score. But I think that if the elections within Pakistan throw up a conglomeration which is supportive of the fringe elements, then I think that the Pakistan army will have to do a rethink.
Right.
You see, but then it's a long shot. One doesn't know whether it will happen or not.
Right. We have about 30 seconds, ma'am. Very briefly, if you could, does it look ominous for Karzai post 2014 elections in Afghanistan? Will the Taliban resurface like we are all fearing?
Very quickly, I will mention 2 points. One is that there are other factions other than Taliban also. Let's not rule them out. India's strategy should therefore be to identify its interests with the groups, which and revive, our interest the way we were confronting it. Secondly, take Iran into cognizance, take Russia into cognizance, which is moving closer to Pakistan on this issue. I think it's very important for India to work not only with the United States together, but also Russia and China, with Russia and Iran, with which we share interest in Afghanistan.
On that note, Professor Pandey,
But India must also build on the goodwill it has earned amongst the Pashtuns, because the earlier policy was to, keep all our eggs in one basket. That was the Northern Alliance.
Right. We have to close the show here, end the show here. Thank you so much to all my guests, Commodore Uday, Bhaskar, thank you so much for joining us on The Big Picture. Professor Savita Pandey as well as Vinod Sharma. And that's all the time we have on The Big Picture. Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.